Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. Dr. Suzanne Crowe is an intensive care doctor and the current president of the Medical Council of Ireland. Her new book, Intensive Care, True Stories of Healing, Heartache and Hope from Inside Irish Children's Medicine, is an account of her work as a children's doctor, but also of her own tremendous personal grief. Suzanne, you're very welcome.
Thanks,
Venetia. This week. I want to ask you first about working in intensive care, and because I think for most people, they would imagine that it is a job of two halves. It can be the most rewarding, but it can be the most heartbreaking at the same time.
It's a job that has everything, to be honest. It's an absolutely wonderful job. It's incredibly stimulating intellectually because the medical problems are huge and they come thick and fast. So you have to learn to think quickly, react quickly. But then there's also the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect. And also you have three patients usually, not just one. So, you know, and a lot of doctors might not like that aspect, but when you are looking after a child, you're also looking after their parents. And so the dynamic in the room can be quite different to when you're looking after an older person. Yeah,
because it is a younger child or a younger person who has their whole life, and suddenly for the parents, it's the possibility that this might not happen.
Yeah, well, we kind of deal with two scenarios there. One would be children who are born on a very different path in life, where quite quickly, either when mum was pregnant or after birth, it's discovered that there is a problem, and that could be something that is going to affect them for their whole life and may even mean that they have quite a short life. But then we have another group of children who are just out on their bikes one day, it's a normal day, and then something happens. And so they are two quite different groups. And then for some families, you can have both together. So some families have lost more than one child, and that can change things again.
And that must be even more pressure for you if you know that, because it's like you're ensuring even more that it doesn't happen to them again.
Yeah, I mean, it's every child is incredibly special, but you do get the feeling sometimes that, you know, this child that's in front of you at the moment is even more special because maybe the parents have lost a couple of children before. And that would be particularly when parents have been on a long fertility journey and they perhaps have had multiple miscarriages and perhaps infant loss. That's very, very difficult because they're bringing all their previous experiences in as well, and you're trying to guide them through this new experience.
To go down that route and to choose to work in intensive care, you talked in your book about a conversation you had with your granddad before he passed away and what he said to you, and having that being quite pivotal in your decision to continue medicine and go down that route.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I would have had lots of conversations with various family members over the years, but it really crystallised with my granddad because fortunately most of us were quite healthy, and he had been living with us for most of our teenage years, and then he became sick. And he was very frank in the way he explained to me that he knew he had cancer and he knew he was going to die, even though my mum was trying to pretend that that's not what was going on. So, and I think he just really reminded me that it's the person first. And I really liked that idea, and it carried me the whole way through my medical training, but also working in the intensive care, because when you work in intensive care, it's very technology heavy. I mean, we love our kit. We love our equipment, our pumps and our machines. And so it's quite easy, unless you're doing it deliberately, to lose the person in a way behind all of that. And yet you've got to keep the person in the middle of everything you're doing.
what, when you're in that, everybody's been in the room, I guess, where you have to go and bring bad news to people at times. And you've spoken about recently how people react and how people react towards you and the news perhaps that you've given them about their child. How does that make you feel, or how does that, you said people get angry at you. How does that make you, I suppose, feel as a person and want to continue?
I would have to say now that the anger would be one of the less common reactions that we face, because we do a very gentle job in guiding people towards that news, and we're actually incredibly careful that you're not just pushing somebody off a cliff and giving them a message that they have had no warning of. We will use little phrases along the way, like, I'm really worried about your son, or we're trying all the treatments, but we're really worried because nothing's working. So we will try and sow seeds along the way so that when you are sitting down in a room breaking news like that, it's not breaking over your head like a massive wave. In fact, it makes sense. So I take a lot of pride and a lot of care in actually those conversations. And it really just comes back to something incredibly fundamental, which is you try to do it the way you would like it done for you.
But it must still stay with you at times. That, like, how do you separate yourself from, you walk out the doors and you're going home to your kids?
I do separate it, but not completely. And I think it's a mistake actually to compartmentalise it too much, because if you're not feeling anything, you really shouldn't be there anymore. You need to take time out, I would say. And actually becoming depersonalised is a real critical sign of burnout. So, separating yourself completely is not good. Definitely there are times I come out of the room and I need to go into the office with my colleagues and close the door, and we give each other huge support because we all do that task and we know how much it takes out of us. And sometimes you just think, I just don't know if I can do this. And I'm thinking back to one shift in particular a couple of years ago, where we had 3 deaths in the intensive care unit in a 24-hour period. It was the weekend, so I was the only intensive care consultant there. And I did walk out at the end thinking, yeah, I need to stop. But, you take time off and you refill your cup, and that's something you learn during your training, is what recharges you. And that's very personal, I think.
Yeah, and do you have something specific that you do to recharge yourself? Like, do you go for a walk? Do you go for a swim? Do you have that cut off?
I do love exercise, but actually I would say the real chicken soup for my soul is my own kids.
Yeah.
Just, sitting around the kitchen table and not talking about anything to do with my work, and instead just immersing myself in the details of, their stories from school.
Yeah.
That just really fills me back up.
Yeah. In the book, you share different stories about different kids, and it's some of the stories, it's very hard, I think, as a mother, not to find upsetting, or not to become emotionally sort of evolved in, because it's just so heartbreaking, some of the stories. One of them, Jamie, and you talked about his halo and like the halo effect that you felt. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, and I did struggle with putting that description in the book because I thought maybe everybody would think I was a bit
No, I thought it was
nuts.
Lovely because it was just...
I was just trying to explain, I suppose, the kind of the pull and the focus that when I walk into a room, because I suppose I'm a long time doing this job, so if I walk into a room and I see somebody who's in a lot of trouble and death isn't far away for them, the pull that I get to them, and how when I will think back on that moment, there's nothing else in the room. There's no one else in the room. There's nothing else in the room. The only thing that I can see is that person, and for my work that will be a child. And that it's all just about responding to that. Yes, of course, I'm interacting with, the monitor on the wall, the numbers that I can see, the child's parents and the other staff. But that's all a blur, both at the time, really, and then also after. It's just that physiological connection nearly to someone else is something that happens for me. I don't know if it happens for other people. I would say it probably does. I'm probably just articulating it.
Because there's other kids you mentioned, obviously, as well as April, who you were close to, and I think your husband referred to as, when she passed away, as not our April, as in she was almost a member of your family. How do you deal with something like that? Because through the weeks that they might be in hospital, or the months, you must grow personally attached to these kids.
They're the most difficult, I think. We do have some children who spend weeks, months. We've even had some children who've been with us in intensive care for longer than a year. And I very deliberately picked that story because I wanted to explain the devastating impact on the staff caring for a child like that.
Would you tell us a little bit about her, maybe?
Yeah, she was a little girl, and she was born with a lot of very complex medical issues. It's quite a long time ago, so we weren't as well set up for bringing children like that out to the community and living at home. So for really all of those reasons, she ended up living in intensive care for a couple of years. And so she grew up there.
Wow. So she was on monitors and everything for...
Yeah, I mean, as she got better and as things kind of improved, she was on less monitors, and she would sit in a high chair during the day and, throw things at the staff. And yeah, she was quite the little madam now. Yeah. She was quite the character. And she really dominated life on the intensive care. But because, we don't have a massive number of staff, so everybody would have worked with her a lot. And also her parents were there a lot of the time. So we also could form a very close bond to the child's parents also. And so when she did, unfortunately, get much, much sicker and die, we experienced, and I certainly experienced that loss as if it was, a friend or a friend's baby or someone that I had known in my town. So, and I think maybe that's something that people outside of a hospital would never really appreciate. But I know from talking to healthcare staff that work in long-term residential facilities, that they would also experience terrible grief after the loss of some of their patients, because it's an enduring relationship that's gone on for longer, and you may well have spent more hours with that person than you have some of your friends or family in the preceding year.
And from the point of view then of, in the future, do you stay in contact with the parents, or is that sort of beyond a professional?
That's a tricky one because you have to
for the
try
parents,
and
they
maintain.
must want to keep that.
So, what we do is, what we say is, doors always open for a visit. We absolutely love when people come back. Clearly, there's no mandate to do so, but we love when people come back, and we love for them to send us little updates. So, very commonly, we'd get a photograph in the post after a couple of years, or a letter. And we get lots of visits. So, and particularly if something happens in the family, like a new baby or something like that, then families would very often get in touch again. Or going to school will be another big thing, where if we've looked after the child when they were a baby, the next
milestone.
thing. Yeah, and I have to say, it's just the nicest thing ever. To get a photograph in the post of a little kid in a school uniform is just worth gold. I mean, that's the job sorted. Yeah, that is a great thing. So lots of families will keep in touch, and I think a lot of them would consider us to have been very important in their early lives. Of course, they're glad to leave intensive care and close the door on us. But I think we do kind of keep a bit of an emotional connection.
Do you ever get any of your patients coming up to you, or perhaps their parents, when you're out going, excuse me, this is so-and-so, and you saved their life?
I've been approached in restaurants and cafes, and I think even once in the hairdressers.
But that must be lovely.
It is
to
lovely.
see them as
No, it is lovely.
you know.
Absolutely gorgeous. And I even I even went out for afternoon tea a couple of years ago with a girl who was now 18, and she'd done her leaving cert, and I had looked after her when she was a baby. And
Wow.
yeah, Facebook mums
Yeah.
managed to track me down through the network, and we had gone out together, and that was really gorgeous.
Wow.
Because I had been only in training when I'd looked after her, and obviously I'd lost track of them, and in many ways I'd seen her battle through some awful days, and that would not have ever imagined that she would be, finishing school and doing exams, and there she was.
Wow. That must give you a certain sense of joy and pride, and it must be emotional.
It is,
see
it
that.
is. And I really do think it's that case of the biggest reward is nearly the opportunity to do more. So you take that reward and you go back in kind of with like new energy, and you look at the next baby and go, hey,
Yeah, I can
you could be doing your exams in a few years' time.
Yeah.
So I think it's all just about bringing the feeling in, but then immediately playing it back out.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, you also talk about the loss of your own baby, Beatrice, who was born at 25 weeks. You were in France and she survived for 19 days.
That's right.
Would you tell us a little bit about Beatrice?
Yeah, and hers is the longest story in the book, and in ways that was deliberate because, firstly, obviously, I know the most about it, but secondly, I wanted to show that the other stories are glimpses into other people's lives. If they were to tell their story, it would be a far longer chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But I used the opportunity to tell the story of Beatrice, and go into a lot more detail. So she was my fourth child, and I didn't expect to be pregnant, and it was a shock. I think I was heading for 40 anyway. So there was a lot to get my head around. I was not that well during the pregnancy, and then we went on holidays as things had started to improve, and she was born unexpectedly in France, and we obviously had to manage all of that. We also had our 3 children that were quite young at the time with us, and so we had to get them back to Dublin and deal with everything then after that.
So you're in a country where, you didn't really speak much of the language, and all this is happening, and you're suddenly the other side of where you're used to being.
Yeah, no, definitely my schoolgirl French had not prepared me for this experience.
Yeah.
And because of my husband having to be outside with the children a lot of the time, I was alone for most of the time that I was in hospital, both myself and then with Beatrice. So it was a very solitary experience, and experienced then as a parent and as a mother, as opposed to being a doctor. So even though I knew on an intellectual level a lot of what was going on, and why she was sick and why she was struggling so much, I did not know. I'd never walked the path where I'd had the feelings of being the mum in that situation, and that's what I had to do.
And obviously, we were talking earlier about sort of phrases you'd bring in to other people, to parents whose children you're looking after, to sort of start sowing the seed, I suppose, that it mightn't work out the way everyone hopes. How did that happen for you? And did you?
Yes and no. I think I chose to ignore a lot of the possibly more subtle messages that the French staff were trying to give me. I was fixed on a very optimistic view. I was in the background emailing and texting people, trying to find out when I could get her back to Dublin. So I think I did. In retrospect, I think I ignored some of what they might have been saying to me, but they did say things like, if they thought that it was too much for Beatrice, that they would tell me, and that they wouldn't continue just to gain an extra day, that they would try and give us some time. And then also on the day that the French doctor did tell me that Beatrice was going to pass away, she was very gentle. She was very, very caring. And I've replayed that conversation about a billion times in my head. And I have to say, she did it really well. And I think she did all the things that I now try to do and I try to teach other people to do. She handled it in a really compassionate, gentle way.
So your husband, you came home as well to Dublin briefly. Because obviously 3 kids in France with you, and then you came back. You were then able to take Beatrice back when she passed away, but you had to come home first.
Yes.
That must have been horrendous.
It was. I actually have only the barest memory of that second flight back. That was really, really awful. And I think in my mind too was, what was I going to tell my children? They were with my parents at that stage. Even as you try to kind of take on board the news and the message yourself that your child has died, I think the protective thing of being a parent kicks in, and you're just thinking, what am I going to tell my kids? How am I going to make this okay for them? Which of course is ridiculous, because you can't really make it okay. But my own mum was really, was really what happened there. Like she stepped in and she helped me with the other children.
And how did you tell them? Because that is a very difficult, obviously, thing to do, because kids have questions.
I have to say we've always had very open, kind of honest conversations, because maybe just being a doctor and being a mother, whenever my children ask me anything about the human body or anything that's going on, I do tend to be quite detailed in my answers. I don't like kind of the whole, holding things back or secrets, but I did want to tell them in a careful way. So we were in my mum's kitchen, and we brought them in, and I told them that Beatrice had died. They were very young at the time. My 2 girls were maybe like 7 and 4 kind of ages. So they didn't really kind of take it on board. They'd only met her once or twice anyway in France. So it was quite unreal to them. But what they were really disturbed about was how sad I was. And that's what kind of freaked them out. And that's, to this day, that would be the biggest memory they have of the whole experience, is my sadness.
Now, obviously, it is incredibly sad. But in the months afterwards and the weeks afterwards, you struggled with, in your book, with day to day, basically, and coming to terms that this had happened. How did you get through those days?
I think I really kind of hamstrung myself at the start, because I just decided I was very rooted in, I think, what I had learned about grief when I was in medical school, that, you just kind of got over it and you go through certain stages. If you just kind of hung on long enough, it would all happen. The person would kind of disappear from your mind, and it would all be fine. And I just I was impatient for that to happen, and I couldn't understand why it wasn't. I think I just was really struggling with many of the things, with the pregnancy and my reluctance on being pregnant and going ahead and having Beatrice, all of the experience in France, and then the fact that she had died, and I blamed myself hugely for that. So I couldn't make it right in my head, was the thing. And so as a result, it didn't leave my head. And it was really only when I suppose coming up to a year or a year and a half maybe after she had died, that I just came to the realization that this just wasn't working for me. I wasn't, in my mind, having what I thought was normal grief. I've since learned there's no such thing. And that what I would do is I would keep my connection to her, and I would use it. And it was at that point that I decided to return with kind of renewed purpose and work in intensive care. And I did later read and discover that that is called a continuing bond. And when I read about it, it just made complete sense to me. And I realised that's exactly what I had done with Beatrice. I didn't know it was a thing that other people had described, but it meant that I, in a sense, of course I accepted that she had died, but I never accepted that she was gone from my life, because she's not gone from my life.
No.
She's with me all the time, and I continue to actually lean on her and use her death and her life for my work. I don't talk about it, and in the book I do now, but prior to that, the preceding kind of 15, 14 years, I didn't talk about it, partly because it's incredibly private, but secondly because I just thought that people might think it was quite a bizarre thing to do. And now I think, something, I don't really care whether people do or don't, because actually I think it offers huge hope to people that, you can lose somebody that you really, really love, but still continue on and actually get tremendous comfort out of their ongoing kind of connection to your life.
And that obviously would have impacts your work and how you now see other parents, and, because you're coming from the other side.
Yeah, it really does. And I would try, I suppose, explain grief to parents, particularly if we have plenty of time and we know what's going to happen. And I would say to couples that they need to be careful as they're grieving as a couple, because it really is a very difficult thing to do two people together. But other than that, I wouldn't try and kind of impose too much on other people's story, because it's just such an individual road.
And it's their story.
It really is. And I think you only see the road when you look back over your shoulder.
And your own relationship at the time with your husband, Barry, you managed with your grief together. He seemed very supportive.
No, he's a fantastic husband and very supportive. And I think because I had seen couples falling apart kind of relationship-wise in the hospital and at the bed space over the years, I knew this was a hazard. So even on the day that Beatrice died, I said that to him. And so we very deliberately tried to stick together on it. But even still, we still ended up doing it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But at least it meant that periodically we could come back to each other and go, we have drifted a bit. We know why this is. We can come back together on this. And so we were very lucky that we were able to maintain our relationship, even though we both grieved in different ways.
Very sadly then, 6 years ago, you lost your husband, Barry. Obviously, that's a huge thing for you. It's a huge thing for your kids. And especially after what you've both already gone through, or you'd all already gone through, losing Beatrice. How have you grieved his death maybe differently?
Yeah, it has been quite different because that was a very sudden event. So I had no warning. It was just, a normal Friday. And the normal Friday turned into the most abnormal day ever. So it was a complete shock, and I think it meant that my grief has been quite different. But also my children were older and are older, and so my need to protect them was possibly even stronger, actually, because I was so conscious of the effects it would have on them. They were at quite a delicate stage in their ages. So we really just stuck together, me with them. I think probably at times I've probably behaved more like a child than they have, but we've kept it in the house, and we've kept together, which is great. And again, we continue to have very open conversations. We talk about Barry all the time, what he liked, what he didn't like, how he drove us mad about some things, and what he would have done in certain situations.
The funny stories help.
Yeah, they really help. And actually the humour has been there right from the start. On day one, when all the people who come into your house when somebody dies suddenly, and they bring food and everything, and it's amazing. And when they finally left, we did sit around the kitchen table and just kind of go, what are we going to do? And there was humour. There was humour. And over the following months, I remember thinking, if people knew about some of the things that we're laughing at, we probably would all be locked up.
Yeah.
But it has helped us.
It's cathartic, and it just, I think, adds that extra sort of. I actually find it quite a loving thing to do, because
it is.
You find you're finding the best bits of the person in one way, because the things that made you laugh.
Yeah, and I don't think I had to kind of do the ongoing connection in such a deliberate way, because the connection's there, because my children are there. And everything, there's so many things they do every day that I think, oh my God, that is my husband.
Yeah.
So, the connection is there. I like, this is a bond that's never going to go away. And I miss him less, but I do still miss him. Even this morning, I thought of something and I thought,
tell him that.
Yeah. So I miss him, and I get terrible, obviously, pangs of just really, really craving his company. And even with, the writing of the book, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm telling stories about him and about our children. And were he here now, he definitely would have had something to say about some of the things that I've written. He probably would have challenged the accuracy of them. So, his absence is in my life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And you lost your dad as well. So it's been quite a difficult few years for you as well. How's that changed you, I suppose, just generally, and how you move forward?
I think it's probably made me softer and kinder, and maybe a little bit more patient with other people around us. Because, of course, if you walk out into the street, everyone around you has had loss. Of course, when you're still grieving in a very acute way, you think that everyone else is just getting on with their lives. But we all have these things. My dad's death is very different, because he's 83, and we'd had a lovely relationship our whole lives. I've wonderful memories of him. Even in the couple of weeks before he died, he'd given me really good life and financial advice. But in a very kind of dad way, as in, if you don't do this, you're just stupid.
No holds barred.
No hold barred. So, I think he died in a very peaceful way. There was no difficult decisions for our family to make. He did it in the way almost as if he'd nearly designed it, if you know what I mean. In that, he knew that we loved him, and we knew that we were loved by him. So there was nothing to regret on that. And so that has been a much gentler experience.
It's more sadness than
it's more sadness.
Overwhelming.
Yeah. But even with the sadness, I just feel such love as well, because I just think, gosh, Dad, you did a good job. You weren't perfect, but you did a good job. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on this week, Dr. Suzanne Crowe.
Thanks.
You. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.